Imagine for a second that you're deploying to this freezing high-altitude mountain pass in the Himalayas.
Oh, brutal condition.
Right. I mean, just absolute extreme weather. You're facing a massive advancing army. You've got incredible personal courage, and you are totally ready to do your duty.
Because the individual soldiers really were brave.
Exactly. But here's the catch. Your map of the battlefield is like 2 months out of date.
Wow.
Yeah. And your commander is completely detached from the reality of the terrain. And headquarters has basically handed you a hammer and 2 nails and ordered you to build an impenetrable fortress.
It's just a complete setup for failure.
Totally. And that's what we're looking at today. We are doing a deep dive into a classified autopsy of a system that basically set its bravest people up to fail.
Yeah, the Anderson-Brooks report.
Right, specifically the salient features of it. It's the official operational review that was commissioned right after the 1962 Sino-Indian War. But, our mission for this deep dive isn't just to recount military history.
No, we really want to put on our institutional analyst hats here.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. We want to extract the actual anatomy of operational failure and answer this really profound central question. Why do organizations fail, even when the individuals inside them are incredibly brave?
It's honestly the ultimate question of institutional design.
Right.
Because when you have people on the ground who are fighting with this unquestionable courage, but the entire structure just collapses around them, you have to look past the individuals. You have to examine the blueprint.
You can't just point fingers at the people holding the line.
Exactly. Failures of this magnitude shouldn't be studied just to assign blame. They need to be dissected to look at systems, processes, decision-making, preparedness.
Which brings us to that formula you were talking about earlier.
Right, yeah. There's this core formula at the heart of operational reviews like this one. It goes like this: experience plus honest analysis plus institutional reform equals future capability.
Experience plus honest analysis plus reform.
Equals capability, yeah. Because if an organization cannot stomach the honest analysis, if they just can't face
They
it.
never actually implement the reform.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And then they just permanently cripple their future capability.
So to understand the sheer scale of the failure documented here, we kind of first need to establish the background of the report itself. And the timeline is just striking.
It moved really fast.
It did. So the Sino-Indian conflict ended on November 21st, 1962. And exactly 23 days later, on December 14th, an operational review was formally ordered by the Chief of Army Staff.
They really wasted no time on that.
No, they didn't. The 2-member committee consisted of Lieutenant General Thomas Bryan Henderson Brooks and Brigadier P.S. Bagat. But looking at the sources here, there is this massive restriction placed on these investigators.
But for reference, yeah.
Right. So the terms of reference ask them to look at training, equipment, the system of command, and the physical fitness of the troops. But, and this is but they were explicitly forbidden from reviewing the functioning of Army headquarters, or the relationship between the Ministry of Defense and Army HQ, or, any political and diplomatic decisions.
Which is crazy when you think about it.
It is. How do you diagnose a systemic disease if you're explicitly told you cannot examine the brain of the organization?
Well, it's a severe limitation, obviously. And I think it highlights a really crucial lesson regarding the scope of any institutional review.
What do you mean?
Well, investigations are almost always fenced in by, political realities and self-preservation at the highest levels.
Right. The people at the top don't want to be investigated.
Exactly. The committee couldn't touch the highest echelons of government or the international environment. However, the areas they were allowed to examine, like training, tactical command, physical prep, those are the bedrock of operational reality.
Okay, so even with the restrictions, it still matters.
Deeply. You can have the most brilliant diplomatic strategy in the world, but if your troops aren't trained and your supply lines are broken...
And your commanders can't actually influence their men.
Right. If all that is broken, the entire system still collapses.
So they operate within this fenced-in scope, but what they document on the ground is just nothing short of a structural implosion.
It's a total collapse.
The report maps out developments under 3 specific zones. You've got Western Command in Ladakh, which is high up in the Himalayas to the northwest. Then you have Eastern Command in Nifa.
And just for those who might not know the geography, Nifa stands for the Northeast Frontier Agency.
Right, which is roughly modern-day Arunachal Pradesh in India's northeast.
Exactly.
And finally, they looked at the operations under the Army's the 5th Corps. And a corps is a massive military formation, right? We're talking tens of thousands of soldiers.
Huge numbers of people.
And the language the report uses to describe the fate of these formations is just brutally blunt.
Yeah, the authors actually refer to it as a sordid tale.
Wow. In an official military document.
Yes. They document that Army formations in the eastern sector simply disintegrated or fled the scene of battle.
Disintegrated. That is a heavy word.
And they describe areas held by troops falling like nine pines to the advancing Chinese forces, just collapsing, one after another with minimal resistance.
So if we apply a strict analytical framework to this, like identifying the problem, tracing the underlying cause, and then looking at the operational effect, the core finding of this entire document seems to boil down to a massive task-resource gap.
That is the fundamental problem right there.
But the mission they were assigned was entirely decoupled from the forces they actually had available.
Yeah, the underlying cause was the assignment of unrealistic tasks without adequate forces or equipment. And the sources show something really frustrating here.
What's that?
Prior war games had explicitly proven that both the Ladakh and the Eastern theaters needed a minimum of one division each just to address the military imbalance with China.
Wait, really? So they knew beforehand?
They absolutely knew.
Right.
The institutional knowledge existed. The system knew exactly what was required to hold the line.
But that professional knowledge was just ignored.
Totally ignored. The resources were never provided. And the sources note that reinforcements only began arriving after the war was already lost.
That is wild. It's literally like an architect ordering a crew to build a skyscraper, but providing them with like a single wheelbarrow of cement.
And a hammer and two nails.
Right. And then expressing shock when the foundation cracks. You just cannot mandate an outcome without providing the necessary inputs.
And the operational effect in that chain of events is just inevitable. Troops are given impossible orders, which predictably leads to total operational failure.
Unrealistic task, leading to limited resources, leading directly to collapse.
Exactly. And when commanders are starved of resources like that, they're forced into disastrous tactical choices.
Right, making bad bets because they have no chips left.
Exactly. The most notable blunder highlighted in the report is this deployment strategy referred to as penny pockets, or sometimes penny packets.
Okay, I was looking at this term, penny pockets. Given that we just established they lacked the necessary troop numbers, breaking their forces into tiny, isolated groups scattered across this massive geographic area seems completely counterintuitive.
It is counterintuitive.
So what is the operational effect of doing that in an actual combat zone?
The effect is absolute isolation. When you deploy in penny pockets, there is zero mutual support between units. Your concentration of force is incredibly weak.
So if one tiny outpost gets attacked...
The neighboring outpost is too far away and it's too small itself to offer any meaningful reinforcement.
Oh, man.
The institutional lesson here, and honestly, this applies to business strategy just as much as military deployment, is that concentration of force is not negotiable.
If you spread your limited resources too thin, you just guarantee failure across the board.
Right, you make yourself weak everywhere and strong nowhere.
Okay, so on top of the physical isolation of the troops, the administrative structure was also completely fragmented. There's this really terrifying detail regarding the command structure.
Oh, the bypassing of channels.
Yes. Higher echelons were frequently bypassing the chain of command to issue direct operational orders to lower-level units.
Which is a huge red flag.
If a CEO bypasses middle management and starts directly giving tactical instructions to, like, factory floor workers, chaos is inevitable.
Oh, immediate operational paralysis.
Yeah.
Bypassing command channels causes a complete loss of responsibility at the intermediate levels.
Because the middle managers are just entirely cut out of the loop.
Right. The brigade or battalion commanders have no idea what their own troops are being instructed to do by Army headquarters.
That's a nightmare.
And secondly, it severely slows down adaptation. I mean, the general sitting hundreds of miles away, issuing direct orders, cannot see the local terrain. They can't see the weather or the immediate enemy movements.
Clear command creates effectiveness. Broken command creates confusion.
Always.
But that chaos only persists if those bypassed intermediate commanders are, like, too afraid to tell their superiors to stop. Which brings us to a massive psychological failing documented in the report.
Yeah, the issue of moral courage.
Exactly. We really need to dissect the difference between physical courage and moral courage here.
This is arguably the most profound institutional finding in the entire review. The investigators identified a severe lack of moral courage among the senior staff and commanders.
And how do they define that versus physical courage?
Well, physical courage is the willingness to face physical danger. to stand under fire. And the individuals on the ground had that in abundance.
Right.
Moral courage, on the other hand, is the willingness to look at your superiors and speak professional truth to power.
To say no.
To say, the operational plan you have handed me is completely divorced from reality, and my men will be slaughtered if we try to execute it.
Did anyone actually try to speak up, though? To question these unrealistic assumptions?
Some did, yeah. But the report notes that commanders who clearly stated the operational difficulties or who presented honest analysis of the capability gap were simply removed from command.
Wow. So they were punished for telling the truth.
Yes. They were replaced by leaders who were willing to just accept the impossible orders. The system actively punished moral courage and filtered for pure compliance.
So you end up with a leadership cadre that is compliant but completely detached from reality.
Exactly.
And this detachment was perhaps most fatal when it came to understanding the terrain, because the sources point out how senior commanders lacked even a basic appreciation for the geography and logistics of the region they were fighting in.
It's unbelievable. But you really cannot command an environment you do not understand. There was a profoundly faulty operational appreciation of defense lines.
Like what's an example?
Well, the report gives a glaring example of the confusion at higher headquarters between holding Salah versus Bomdila.
These are high-altitude mountain passes, right?
Right. We're talking freezing temperatures, brutal elevation, and just a sheer logistical nightmare to maintain supply chains. If a commander doesn't intimately understand the terrain, they cannot understand the logistics required to actually survive in it.
And when a commander is entirely ignorant of the operational environment and the enemy suddenly appears in force, what happens? They panic.
Yeah.
The report explicitly documents panic reaction by senior commanders. It specifically cites the general officer commanding the 4th Division, who gave these hasty, disastrous evacuation orders from Salara.
Because panic is the direct child of unpreparedness.
Right?
When task requirements massively exceed your preparation levels and you suddenly realize all your assumptions were completely false, panic is honestly the only remaining psychological response.
So the future application of this lesson is simple. Preparation must precede commitment.
It has to. If commanders do not grasp the mountains and the supply chains, any operational plan they formulate is basically just fiction.
Okay, so this brings us to a really critical junction in our causal chain. We have troops spread in penny pockets, a bypassed chain of command, leaders lacking moral courage, and commanders who don't understand the terrain.
A perfect storm.
Truly. But why were they physically positioned in these indefensible areas in the first place? And that traces back to a flawed national directive called the Forward Policy.
Right. So the forward policy was a political objective. The goal was to establish outposts in disputed territorial areas to physically assert national claims.
Okay.
The political requirement was formalized, even though military wisdom and logistical reality completely dictated that it was unfeasible.
So the capability mismatch was extreme from the jump.
Very extreme. Yet it was applied to the Eastern Front with devastating results.
But how does an institution justify implementing a policy when its own military experts know they lack the capability?
Well, the answer there lies in a complete systemic failure of the intelligence cycle.
Right. Let's break that down. If we look at the intelligence cycle and its core components, collect, analyze, distribute, and act, we can basically see that every single link in the chain just snapped.
It failed at every level. It began at the collection and analysis phase. The director of the Intelligence Bureau, B.N. Mullick, insisted that China would not react with active hostility to India's forward policy.
Wait, the Intelligence Bureau being the civilian internal intelligence agency, right?
Yes.
So the chief of civilian intelligence builds a foundational assumption that the adversary simply won't fight back.
Yeah. And while military intelligence heavily disagreed, feeling a strong Chinese response was highly likely, the report notes this view was not forcibly put across.
Oh, which loops right back to our analysis of moral courage.
Exactly. The military analysts failed to forcefully challenge the civilian intelligence assessment. And as a result, that flawed assumption became the foundation of the entire political and military aim.
So the analysis is fundamentally broken at the highest level. But even when tactical intelligence was gathered, the distribution mechanism was practically archaic.
Oh, the distribution was a disaster.
The sources reveal that the Military Intelligence Directorate would publish weekly intelligence reviews. But these documents were taking 6 to 7 weeks to reach the military formations on the ground.
It's staggering.
I mean, think about the mechanism of that delay. If your intelligence is 6 weeks old, You aren't just fighting blind. You're actively planning defenses against a reality that no longer exists.
We're making life and death decisions based on a ghost environment.
Fighting ghosts.
Exactly.
Yep.
And the operational effect of this broken distribution cycle was that tactical commanders and troops remained, in the report's own words, blissfully unaware of Chinese operational moves.
Blissfully unaware.
Because their intelligence was completely obsolete, they were just led into one ambush after another. Furthermore, there was a total deficiency in tactical awareness.
How so?
Well, the Indian forces failed to comprehend Chinese strategy and tactics, which the report points out closely mirrored the tactics China had utilized heavily during the Korean War.
So they hadn't studied their adversary's historical behavior at all. When your distribution cycle is that slow, and your tactical awareness is that poor, decision-making at headquarters becomes entirely divorced from the ground truth. With a 6-week lag, the generals at Army headquarters are essentially playing a chess game where the opponent's pieces moved a month ago.
Which is exactly why the report lashes out at the military leadership's decision-making, describing it as appalling and disastrous.
Wow.
Our headquarters consistently ignored the desperate ground feedback from the few commanders who did actually try to speak up. There was a total lack of unanimity in the decisions taken, reinforcements were dispatched way too late, and the decision-makers were completely insulated from the reality of the front lines.
You know, we should clarify that while this systemic collapse was widespread, the report does contrast the different geographical sectors. They didn't all exhibit the exact same failures.
No, they didn't. And extracting patterns from how different sectors handled the same crisis is really vital for institutional analysis.
Right.
The eastern sector serves as the negative pattern. It's characterized by planning weaknesses, deep panic, and total systemic collapse. But the western sector over in Ladakh actually demonstrated a positive pattern of institutional behavior, even though the ultimate outcome was still a strategic loss.
Yeah, the report actively praises Western Command.
They do.
Because they conducted a realistic reappraisal of their preparedness for the forward policy. They looked at the political directive, they looked at their military means, and officially raised the concern that their capabilities were just not adequate.
Right, they asked for additional troops. Now, Army headquarters ignored those realistic concerns, which obviously sealed their fate. But the process Western Command followed, assessing reality, speaking professional truth to power, and formally requesting the necessary resources that decision chain was sound.
They demonstrated the operational awareness that was fatally lacking in the East.
Exactly.
Which brings us full circle to the central question we posed at the start of this deep dive. Why do organizations fail despite having incredibly brave individuals?
The report provides the definitive answer, really. The authors go out of their way to highlight the junior leaders and soldiers who fought fiercely against overwhelming odds.
Right.
Courage, determination, fighting spirit. It was present in abundance on the front lines. The individuals did not fail the system. The system failed the individuals.
Because individual excellence, no matter how profound, cannot replace system effectiveness.
It just can't. You can have the bravest personnel on Earth, but if they are deployed in isolated penny pockets, denied critical resources, kept in the dark by 6-week-old intelligence, and commanded by leaders who panic because they don't understand the terrain,
The organization will collapse.
the organization will collapse.
So to crystallize these findings, let's distill this deep dive into an institutional lesson model. If you were to draw a cause and effect diagram of operational success, it requires a very specific framework.
Right.
Operational success equals a clear aim, plus adequate resources, plus professional advice that is actually valued, plus timely intelligence, plus leadership that possesses moral courage.
And if any one of those pillars is removed, the entire structure becomes incredibly vulnerable to catastrophic failure.
Absolutely. So to help you lock this into your memory, let's build a quick mental revision toolkit. If you are analyzing any organization's failure, look for these 5 historical red flags from 1962.
Okay, flag number 1.
First, look for a task-resource mismatch. Are teams being given unrealistic missions without the tools to achieve them?
Right.
Second, look for the penny packet deployment. Is the organization spreading its resources so thin across so many objectives that it's just strong nowhere?
A classic mistake.
Third, evaluate the intelligence cycle. Are assumptions driving policy without evidence? And is critical data suffering from a massive distribution lag?
Fourth is terrain appreciation. Do the leaders actually understand the ground-level environment their teams are operating in, or are they managing from a completely detached headquarters?
Yep. And fifth, the ultimate filter, moral courage. Does the system reward middle managers who speak professional truth to power, or does it punish them and select for blind compliance?
Those are the enduring analytical lessons. It's honestly a masterclass in how institutional blueprints tear apart under pressure when honest analysis is suppressed.
It really is. Yet, despite the immense value of these lessons, there is one final kind of lingering detail we must leave you with.
Oh, yeah. The classification.
Right. This top-secret Henderson Brooks report was never officially declassified or released by the government. It was only selectively leaked to the public in 2014 by an Australian journalist named Neville Maxwell.
And even then, he only leaked a portion of it.
Exactly. He only leaked 64 pages out of the full 190-page document. The rest of it remains locked away in the safe custody of the Military Operations Branch to this very day.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. So we leave you with this final thought to mull over. If just 64 pages of this autopsy can teach us this much about the precise anatomy of institutional failure, what vital lessons are still locked in the dark in those remaining 126 pages?